Registered dietitian and a part of the marketing team here at Healthie. I'm so excited to be joined with Bonnie Taub-Dix and for this amazing webinar about how to work with the media. So we're going to dive right in because Bonnie is covering a lot of information. But before I get started, I just want to say if anybody has any questions throughout this webinar, we will have time for Q&A at the end. So just drop your questions in the chat and I'll be sure to write them down and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. Also, this webinar will be recorded in case anyone needs to run early. So you'll get an email of the recording tomorrow. All right, so let me introduce Bonnie, and I'm so excited to share more about Bonnie with you. Bonnie Taub-Dix is an award-winning registered dietitian, author, media personality, journalist, and corporate and brand consultant whose messages are laced with her culinary passion as a foodie, her incredible guidance as an advisor, and her wit and wisdom as a mother. Bonnie served as a media spokesperson to the New York State Dietetic Association for 5 years, after which she was appointed to the position of spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for 6 years. She has conducted thousands of interviews for all forms of media and is called upon regularly as a trusted resource. She has appeared nationally on television, including Good Morning America, The Today Show, CNN, Fox News, and I could go on, in magazines and newspapers, including the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, The Daily News, and more. And she is frequently quoted in and writes regularly for web venues like Today.com, US News, and Everyday Health. She is also, if that wasn't enough, a published author. Her book, Read It Before You Eat It, Taking You from Label to Table, has been welcomed as a go-to resource in the food labeling arena and has attracted hundreds of interviews in all forms of media. The evergreen subjects of healthy supermarket shopping and label reading continue to be cited regularly. On a personal note, Bonnie is grateful to be able to do what she loves every day. She's married, has 3 sons, and a grandson who are all foodies. So I want to welcome Bonnie, but I want to let you all know to stay tuned to find out how you can take her personalized, intimate media class with an option for a private one-to-one session with her, an offer only open to those who take this webinar. And we'll share the link at the end, and it's only available for the next 3 days. So now let's welcome Bonnie. Hello.
Hello there. I am so happy to be here.
We are so happy to have such a great expert with us. So we are going to dive right in. So why don't you tell us how you got started working in the media?
Well, what happened was when I went to college, I was majoring in psychology and minoring in art. At least that was my intention. And then someone mentioned the field of dietetics, and I didn't even know what it was, but I had just gone on a diet, lost a lot of weight, learned how to eat healthfully, learned how to be mindful about eating, and I decided, okay, fine. Even though I didn't even know what dietetics was, I decided to change schools, change my major, and then the rest is history. What happened was I never wanted to work in a hospital, so I wound up working in hospitals for 11 years, and it was actually working in the hospital that jump-started my career in media because the PR department of the hospital came to me and said, we'd love for you to do a 1-minute commercial about eating over the holidays. So I did it and got a taste for media. And then they had me do these regular commercials on their cable news network. And then what happened was a national TV station came to them and said, we need someone who could talk about a nutrition-related subject. Do you know anyone? Of course, they came to me. And guess what? The subject was about how to pick out tricky labels in the supermarket. So that was one of my first media interviews. And I walked through the supermarket with them, and I loved doing that interview. And who would know that so many years later that it actually wind up writing a whole book, Read It Before You Eat It, about supermarket shopping. So it just goes to show you never know where these media interviews will bring you.
That's such a full circle that your career came into. So we're going to start general, and I want you to share why should nutrition professionals want to work with the media?
Why wouldn't they? I mean, if you don't do it, then somebody else will. And you are the nutrition expert, you have the credibility, so why shouldn't you be the one to get those messages out? There are so many reasons why you should work with media. One is that it really is good for your career. Besides credibility, you could make a lot of money in media, maybe not all media, and maybe not in the beginning, but you can. And then there's also the fame factor. It's kind of nice to be on TV or in other forms of media. But also you could make new clients because patients will love to see that you are coming from a source that is supposedly a credible source. You could also connect with brands because brands love that you are able to be in the news. And even though it's kind of ironic because now it's not that easy to get brand names in the news, they still love that you have the capability to do that. Also, your current clients will love to know that you're in media. My patients love to come and see me, and they bring me little clippings from magazines and newspapers, and they tell all their friends to watch me when I'm on TV. So that's a lot of fun. And also friends and family. I love when my friends and my family actually figure out what I do. And it gives a little credibility to all that time I am not spending with them and what else I'm doing. So that's fun. The other thing is it's for your own personal fulfillment. Not everybody is cut out for media. And when you're able to go on TV, write a story, get your name in print, express yourself in words that other people cannot do, don't think that this is an easy feat because it's really not. So it's the kind of thing that really takes a special personality, and you have that personality. You just have to see what you see fit and where you'd like to work.
That's great. Yes. So once someone decides, because of all the reasons that you just mentioned, somebody decides, okay, I want to go after this, I want to work in the media. What does that really mean? We see in front of the camera, we see the finished product, watching people on TV, reading articles that other dietitians or health professionals may have written. But what is it really like behind the scenes? Give us the behind the scenes action, break it down.
Well, let's just say that there are endless possibilities, but it is a lot of work. It doesn't seem like it's so much work, especially when you see someone up there for a 1-minute interview or a 3-minute interview. That may seem like nothing, but believe it or not, if you could get 3 minutes on a TV show, that is awesome. If you could get 6 minutes on a TV show, that is incredible. So that time may seem like forever when you're up there, but it really does go quickly, but you have to pack a lot into a very short period of time. So it's important that you be current, meaning you need to keep up with the news. You need to keep up with science and studies. And, you know, I kind of call myself an interpreter sometimes. I feel like I work for the UN interpreting scientific messages, but in language that people can really understand. So you have to be a translator. It's also important to keep up with what other people are saying and doing. Other RDs, what they're saying. Try to see who you align with, who you disagree with. It's okay to have your own opinion about something, especially if you're conveying your own messages from your heart, really being consistent about your messages. And it's also important to keep up with fad diets. Even though you may, really disagree with them or really not like them, you need to know the facts about them. So keeping current is really important. It's also important to be timely. And a lot of us know how to do this with social media, with National Whatever Day. Don't write a story about eating over the holidays when it is September. In fact, I once actually wrote a story about eating over the holidays, and I was talking about New Year in September, which was for the Jewish New Year, and one of my editors wrote to me and she said, "Did you mean to send this story in December?" So make sure that you're timely and that you know what the vast majority of your audience will want to hear. But it's also very important to be relevant. And what I mean by that is that if you want to write for a magazine like Shape magazine, for example, You want to write a story that's fun, that's uplifting. If you have a funny story, if you have an anecdote, I love to use humor in my stories. That's perfect for that kind of venue. But if you want to write for the Journal of Nutrition Science, then that's where you'll use words like however and therefore and moreover. But you do not want to use those words in Shape Magazine. So I think if you want to write a fun blog, a fun story, then go out for those kinds of publications. Otherwise, if you're more on the science end, then you could look for publications like that. But I really do want to say you do not have to choose one over the other. You could have a vast array of publications that you write for or shows that you want to be on, but you need to speak to the audience that you are speaking to. And I remember that for one of my first writing jobs, it was for Newsday. The editor for Newsday told me that I should be writing for the 4th grade. And it's not that she thought that her audience was really 4th graders, but that you really need to write in very clear, simple, plain language. And one of the things, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it now, but one of the subjects that is really the foundation of just about every interview I do is learning how to speak in sound bites. And when you work with media, this is where less is more. So writing in those sound bites is really important. And I have my own strategy for how I like to prepare for an interview. So we'll talk more about that.
That was an excellent tip, that especially speaking in sound bites. So I'm curious to learn more about that and see what you have to say. I know we discussed that a little bit behind the scenes, so stay tuned for that. So I just want to actually ask a follow-up question right now, because I think it'll be really helpful for our listeners and everyone that's tuning in. And somebody said, well, what's the best way to stay up to date with current news, trends, fad diets? Where do you typically turn to stay up to date with that information?
I use a lot of different sources. Sometimes if I'm on social media, if I'm ever off social media, but it could even be something like Twitter. It could be, it's not usually, for me, it's not usually Facebook. It's usually something like Twitter, or for me, I listen to the radio all the time. Whenever I'm in my car, unless I'm really driving someplace with someone else, then I'll listen to music. But otherwise, I always listen to news stations in the radio. And I'm switching back and forth from different stations because, as you know, these days, some stations are kind of slanted in one direction or the other, but we won't get into any of those type of discussions here. So radio, I like to watch some TV shows, not much TV. In fact, in working with media, there's so much TV that I watch, especially newscasters, where I turn off the sound. I like to see what they're wearing. I like to see what they're doing with their hands. I like to see where they're looking. I like to see all of that stuff. Like, that's the stuff you need to be aware of if you want to work with media, because that's what your audience is looking for. I remember one of my first interviews I had, it was actually for the Regis Philbin show. So it was a national TV show. And I had hoop earrings. I wore this beautiful white top with black zigzags in it. My hair was long. And like, it was the perfect interview that I used to use as an example of what not to do when you go on TV. But that was before a lot of media training.
Yeah, so it sounds like you could really keep up to date anywhere, which is good to know. Any other media?
And also talking with your colleagues, even Instagram. I mean, social media is a great way to get information, but be careful that you're not just skimming the surface. If you see some sort of study that looks like it's interesting, don't just go by whatever somebody wrote on social media. You really need to look at those studies. In fact, someone said something the other day when I went to the Today's Dietitian conference in Texas, and she said, studies that are about the subjects that have 4 legs instead of 2 legs, you have to really take with a grain of salt. So that is a great way to explain it, especially to your clients who may really believe everything that they read.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I also think, just to add from my experience, how I stay up to date is we get a digest from the Academy, those smart briefs. I find those very useful in staying up to date, and also what my clients might come to me asking about, which is always really useful. So you can also use your clients in your own backyard.
And the other thing is that there are so many different digests. Today's Show has a digest. Huffington Post has a digest. I get a lot of news, specialty food news. So I get a lot of digest from other companies and organizations where they give you these tidbits of stories. So I find that to be very helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So if somebody is now thinking, all right, I just started in private practice, maybe, how do you determine what makes you an expert source to work in the media? What makes you a good candidate over maybe one of your colleagues?
I think that you have to dig deep. I think you have to think about your own inner strengths, your own talents. Think about what your comfort zone is, and then think about how it's nice to sometimes step out of that zone. Not everything is a job that you have to say yes to either. And it's important to think about that. For example, if you're offered to go on a TV show and you've never been on a TV show before, but it's something that you're interested in, and it's a debate, and it's a debate against someone who has written 30 books on the subject that they're talking about. If it's your first TV show, if you're the kind of person that likes a challenge and likes conflict, then that would be an awesome experience for you. You just better prepare for that. But if you really don't feel like you're ready for that, then you don't have to say yes. So don't feel like anything that comes your way is something that you will be ready for, because you may not be. And don't think it's the last time that opportunity will knock, because if you're good at what you do, then you will do it over and over and over again, and people will come to you. So, you have to feel good in your gut with what you're doing.
First and foremost, that's definitely most important. So where can people really find media opportunities? We're talking a lot about TV, maybe a little bit about writing, but what really does the media entail overall?
So it's kind of interesting. My career path, I kind of went backwards with this, because when I was first working with media, there was TV, radio, magazines, and newspapers. So it was very easy to get interviews on those venues because that's what there was. Social media didn't exist, as hard as it is to believe. It's even hard for me to believe that. So I kind of started out where a lot of people now would like to be. And it takes a different kind of communication to be on TV. So you could have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, but if you had to do a TV show, you need to dig deep for a different set of skill sets. So it's a different kind of thing. But media is also in so many different places now. The opportunities are endless. There is, of course, TV and radio and websites and magazines and newspapers and podcasts and Skype. I did a Skype interview with CNN a few months ago, and that was kind of interesting. I'm not a big fan of Skype interviews at all, but it was kind of interesting. Well, I won't go into the story that evolved, but anyway, it was a very interesting experience. But it's really anywhere, and what I would suggest to you is that you try to think about where you would like your voice to be heard. If you are an excellent writer, even if you're a very good writer, you don't have to be an excellent writer, but even if you're a very good writer, then writing may be more of your thing. If you're a good public speaker, then something like TV and radio could be something that you'd like to do a little bit more of. And radio, although yes, you could do it while you're in your pajamas, you'd be surprised at how your voice will come across if you're not feeling very professional. If you're reading your notes. Radio is another whole venue altogether. I love doing radio. But again, there's not a lot of time to go into the detail here, but each one of these platforms really takes a very different set of skills. And it's just really important that you kind of think about where you would like your voice to be heard.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So is there a downfall of working, let's say somebody's like, but I like writing, I like public speaking, so TV and radio sounds really good to me, I want to be on a podcast. Is there a downfall of doing, you've done all of these different types of media, so I'd assume the answer is no, but is there a downfall for doing all of these different types of media? Or in the beginning, should we focus on one over another?
I think it's kind of good to be focused, but you don't have to pigeonhole yourself. But what I will say is that it really is important to think about your time. How much time do you have? If I'm doing something like a TV interview for a national TV show, sometimes it takes me days to prep, really days. And even if it's for a 3-minute interview, it could really take a lot of preparation. And then there's different kinds of preparation. If it's just a straight on interview, then that may take one kind of prep. If I have to do a food demonstration or I'm doing some food styling for the show, then that takes a different kind of prep. It may even take food shopping and schlepping all this stuff with you. I did a TV show for Cinco de Mayo, and I got this gorgeous basket and filled it with avocados, and it was just really magnificent. And then when I went to the station, as it turns out, it was one of those interviews like that get you from your neck up. So not even one avocado made it to the set. I just gave it out to everybody in the newsroom. So you really never know what you're going to do. It's good to ask ahead of time what the setup is going to be like. You know, do you have to worry about your shoes, or is it going to be neck up? But in any event, you have to, I talk a lot about dressing also in my course, because you really need to dress differently for different venues as well. So yeah, so time, to me, time is a major element. And there are many reporters that will take advantage of your time, and you need to also learn how to not let that happen. In fact, when I was a spokesperson for the Academy, I told them that I really wanted to talk to other spokespeople about what kind of reporters really take advantage. And they asked me to give this 2-hour workshop, and I called it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Because there are some reporters that you will love to work with that are just awesome. You feel like inviting them for Thanksgiving. And then there are other ones where they really try to get everything out of you for the story, and you need to know when to cut them off. Like really, you may need to cut them off.
So when you say cut them off, you don't mean on TV. You're talking about maybe if they're looking for a quote for an article?
Yeah. I'm talking about more for writing.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times when I've been interviewed on TV and you have to pivot. You have to get off the subject because they all of a sudden change their mind about their script. And they, if you say something that's interesting to them, they could say, oh, by the way, my husband always does this. What do you think of that? If I had to go on TV for a brand that I was working with, for example, and I know that I had 3 messages that I really had to get out for this brand, and I know I've already been on for like 2 minutes, and I only have 1 more minute, and they're asking me about their husband, I have to come up with a way to get my messages out without sounding like I'm ignoring them.
So lots of thinking on your feet is what I'm hearing.
Lots of thinking on your feet, yes.
I get that for sure.
But also when it comes to which venue you go to, don't be afraid to start small. Don't consider it to be small. Writing for a local newspaper, a local news station, really small could really be a great way for you to get experience, for you to learn how to write, for you to learn what people are asking, for you to even get questions on your stories. It's fun to then have a little Q&A type of thing. I mean, there's no experience that is too small, at least in the beginning.
Absolutely. So if someone, I think this is what everyone wants to know. You decide that you want to work with the media, you're ready for the adventure in your career. And then what is the first step that you suggest new entrepreneurs take to get media opportunities?
Oh, first step. I don't know how to say first step, but I will give you a few steps that you could take. One is you could sign up for HARO, that's HARO, which stands for Help a Reporter Out. And they list titles that they're subjects that they're looking for. And in most cases, they also list the platform that they're writing for. So it could be a magazine, a newspaper, something like that. Be careful about that, because sometimes what they're looking for are all of the answers to their question. It doesn't mean that if you spend 3 hours writing back to them that they're actually going to use your work, use your name, They could wind up not using any of it. They could wind up using it and not quoting you. A lot of things could happen. However, it is really a good way to become introduced to journalists and to get used to answering media queries. Another thing is that you could go to events where media is invited and, schmooze with them. You could respond to comments on stories or respond in the comments on stories. You could connect with editors and writers on social media. You could do pitching. And pitching is something where, again, I give a complete guide to how to write a pitch letter, but pitch letters could come in any form. It could be email, it could be a phone call, it could be a letter in snail mail, believe it or not, that it really could have an impact because nobody does it anymore, really. Could be a telegram, but I'm only kidding about that one, not a telegram. But there are many different ways to pitch. But when you pitch, if there's anything I could give advice about, it's don't give away the whole story. Just give a taste, just a taste of what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's always the hardest part, is knowing when to draw that line and when it's a taste or a full serving. So,
but with that, a lot depends upon who you're also working with. Like, I have editors that I adore, and I've been working with them for years. And sometimes I'll just think of a story that I'd like to write, something I really enjoy writing about, and I might write the whole story and then send them the whole story and see if they like it. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they want a part of it. Sometimes I just send it to somebody else instead if they don't want it. But that is not the best advice for you unless you're going to post it someplace else on your own. Like, sometimes if someone doesn't want a story, I'll just post it on my own blog because I really enjoyed writing it. So it really just depends.
So you're talking about pitching and engaging, with producers and editors. So how do you really find those ways to engage with producers, editors, and those in the media?
Well, like I said, you could go to these events, you could write to them, you could look at the masthead of a magazine and see who's the editor of your particular interest, whether it's health or beauty or nutrition. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but kind of like a bottom line here is that throughout my whole career, I could say that any of the work that I have gotten, any of the media interviews, any of the clients I have connected with, whether it's brands, those kind of clients, or one-to-one clients that I see, it has all come from nurturing relationships, developing relationships. It's come from having credibility and from being genuine, being myself. And don't try to be anybody else. You could admire people who are in the media. You could admire your colleagues, but you are you. And that's the most important thing. What kind of voice do you want to have? What are your messages? What is important to you? And if that comes across, then you will really have accomplished your goal.
Yes, everybody has their own story to tell with their own personality. That is a great takeaway. So a few more questions we have here. So don't forget to send in your questions in the chat box for Bonnie. So we talked a lot about pitching, and I know that you go into a lot more detail in your course, but what exactly does pitching a segment or an article idea really entail? If you had to tell us just a few things of what is a pitch.
Usually when you're writing a pitch, you're trying to solve a problem. What's the problem? Why should they even put you on? Why should they publish a story? What is the big deal about what you're saying? So when you write a pitch, you want to say something about a problem that's there and what needs to be done to solve it and why you are the best person to solve it. And that's the best summary I can give you about a pitch letter, because that really is what it's all about.
That's a quick and dirty response that we wanted. So when exactly is the right time in someone's career to start working with media?
I would say now. That's the beauty of media. See, I kind of look at media as you could multitask and do media. So when I was working with the media at first, I had a full-time job at the hospital. I would work from 6:30 to 2:30. I would leave the hospital and go to private offices and see private patients, and then come home at night. I did that a few days a week. And during that time, I was also writing stories, doing TV interviews, writing for magazines, doing radio. So you could do media anytime you want. I would not say quit your day job because you'd like to work with media, because you really never know how that's going to turn out. And as I mentioned, it could be incredibly lucrative, but sometimes it's not that way at first. And you also have to think about the word value. And what I mean by that is that in my career, and to this day, there are some jobs that I take in media where I don't get paid very much. And sometimes there are actually a few that I do where I don't get paid anything. I barely ever do that anymore. But the way I look at it is that's my marketing budget, because some platforms are really worth it. So it really depends. But don't forget that you are really worth it. So don't settle for that as a given.
That's great advice. Okay, so who is ready to start working with the media? I know I am. You've definitely helped me in a few of my segments that I've had. So thank you very much for that. So let's get to some of these questions, and I'm going to post the link right now about Bonnie's course so that you have it. And let me scroll through these questions. Okay. Susan, I'm not too sure what you mean about starting with your website. So maybe you mean, is it worth starting a blog and start writing on your own website? Is it worth starting a blog? I guess, Bonnie, you're a good person. You have a blog on your website and you also write for national publications. So is it worth, you think, getting that practice?
Writing a blog? Yeah, I think it's really worth writing a blog because it's writing. Any writing that you do is worthwhile. And, you know, when I used to write for Newsday, I used to have a pad and a pen by my bedside. And some of my best stories I would write in the middle of the night, in the dark, and I would just start writing. So whenever you could write, if you want to dictate into your phone or whatever you want to do, if you have an idea. I mean, I get ideas when I'm in the shower. Just write. Just write it down. Don't even worry about whether it's perfect grammar or whether the sentence structure is just the way that you want it. Sometimes I write a story and I think it's like, you know, wow, this is really brilliant. I just love this piece. And then I'll pick it up 3 days later and I'll think like, what was I thinking? So just write. Just write.
It's definitely good practice. And it's also a good way just to add in to boost your SEO by adding to your pages and posts on your website. So that also helps your website become more searchable. SEO is search engine optimization. And so building out a blog with different story ideas that you may have is a good way to do that, which also helps you get found online. People can find you. So if a producer or editor is looking for someone, maybe they're searching for a dietitian in Chicago. And if your website comes up, because you have all those pages from your blog. So that's also a really great way to build your SEO.
You know, something else that I wanted to say is that I have a newsletter that I write, and I don't know how many people are on here subscribed to my newsletter, but my website is betterthandieting.com, and you could join the newsletter there. And even though I would love for you to join the newsletter, I really highly recommend that you join the newsletter because I have been writing this for the past 7 years. And every single week I post 3 stories, and all it is 3 stories, but it's 3 stories that I was either interviewed in or stories that I have written that are on certain publications. So that's every week for the past 7 years. And what this will help you do is you will see what kind of stories I'm getting interviewed for, which could give you ideas about stories that you want to write. So it is really like a media magnet for you to be able to take a look at these stories and use them as a jumpstart for yourself.
It's a great idea.
Thanks for joining if you want to join. No problem.
I dropped the link in the chat box so you can see Bonnie's website with her to sign up for the newsletter. So we have a question from Christina. Have you ever had anyone use their own quotes or writing but quote you as the professionals? How do you handle this situation? So I guess you didn't give the quote and they quoted you anyway?
Are you, well, I don't know if you're talking about in a story or on TV, because I have done some TV shows, like for CNN, for example, where they didn't need me on camera, but they wanted to get advice from me. So then what they did was they put on their screen what I said, and then they put my name on the bottom. So they did use quotes from me, but I didn't actually appear on some of those shows at those times. If someone is quoting you in a story, or I don't know if the question was like, are they copying something that you said and not quoting you? Well, then that's really a problem. Then you need to write to them. If it's on their blog, you may want to ask them to take it down. If it's in a national publication, you may want to write to the editor. So if it's your words and you could show that it's your words, then of course that's something that you need to follow up on.
Yeah, so reach out to the editor or even the person who wrote the story. It might, if you were ever in contact with them. That's a great, don't be afraid to reach out. I think a lot of times people are, oh, I was published, or, you know, you really need to stand up for yourself. And like you were saying, be true to who you are and make sure you are accurately quoted. Okay, so Jenna asked, if you work with a brand, how can you get their name in the media? Will journalists accept quotes if you mention specific products? Very common question. I hear this one a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, the most important word that goes along with that question is the word disclose. You are going to have to disclose that you work with this client, and that's really important for you and for the brand to abide by FTC regulations. But things have changed in the nutrition world now and in PR, and it has gotten very difficult to get brand names in the news. And the funny thing is that so many times magazines and newspapers come to me and reporters come to me and they say, could you give us your 5 favorite foods that you buy at Trader Joe's? And then they want the names of the foods that I buy. They're putting it in their publication. But if I came to them with the story and I was working with Trader Joe's and I said, hey, can I write about 5 things I love about Trader Joe's? The answer would most likely be, I don't think so. Not unless Trader Joe's wanted to pay them some money. And I'm not saying that it's impossible to get a brand's name in the news, because then I wouldn't work with a lot of the brands that I work with, but it's very different than it used to be. Very different.
Do you have any tips about when it might be most appropriate to mention a brand, whether if a journalist asks for one of your favorite foods or a favorite snack or a meal idea, maybe? When is it appropriate to mention a brand that you might be working with, and how do you typically disclose that? Do you just tell the editor when you respond to them, if it's in an email, let's say?
Yeah, I do tell them in an email. And if it's a phone interview, then I tell them on the phone interview, oh, by the way, I love XYZ, and I'm working with that company now, and here's why I love them. And then, you know, you could do it that way. But it is really, really important to disclose.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they'll always publish that you work together, but sometimes they say, okay, well, we can't mention that. And other times they say, okay, thanks. And they may mention it anyway. So it really depends.
Yeah. I think also a lot of times, a lot of brands see it as a plus. And Bonnie, you correct me if I'm wrong, if you've had much more experience with this than I have, but if you mention the category of product for certain situations, like if they're asking your favorite breakfast food and maybe you work with a yogurt company, or if you say, you know, a Greek yogurt, they might be really happy with that mention, even if it's not brand specific. That's a really general example,
but if they're paying you to work with them and say their name, then probably not. Because a lot of brands obviously have a lot of competitors. So they may not be, but it really just depends. You know, working with commodities, it's different than working with brands. Commodities are another story altogether. So they usually want their name mentioned.
okay. So on the same topic of brands, do you ever mention brands in hopes that the company hires you? Like you mentioned them before you're hired.
I don't do as much of that. Sometimes I might if there's something that I really like, but uh, I work with so many brands that I am loyal to that usually I don't. Sometimes I do, but usually I don't. I mean, if there's something that I love, if you follow my Instagram stories, you know that I love certain company that makes certain wines that I like. So very often I'll mention them. I don't work with them. I'm not working with them. But you know, you can, why not?
Yeah, it's also, it could be a good example maybe if you're trying to work with a brand, correct me again if I'm wrong. If you say, oh, I mentioned this, and send them, if you have a contact at the brand, like, oh, I mentioned this, FYI, just to let them know,
Yeah,
to get in good graces.
Yep, it's a very good idea. Another way to reach out.
Okay, so now somebody wants some tips. They have their first live radio interview on Friday. Congratulations. It's 1 hour and I'm bringing 2 clients. I am prepping using the interview questions that they asked me to submit, plus other prep. Any tips?
Yes, one word, smile. You may think that it's radio and that nobody sees you smile, but when you smile and you are uplifted and you are painting pictures with words, then people will know. So just make sure that you are making believe you're on TV.
That's a great tip also, and something that a lot of people wouldn't think about. And I have a question about prep, just going off of that. If you are lucky enough to get the questions for a radio or a TV interview, should you be pretty confident that that's what the interview is going to stick to? Or are there, so you can rehearse those questions, but how do you suggest preparing maybe outside of the box in case something goes on a tangent, like you mentioned, the husband incident?
Yeah. Well, you could hope and pray that that's what they're sticking with, but there's no guarantee of that. So this is again, in the course the private course that I'm going to give. It's kind of like message trees that I teach people how to do, where you have to build upon the messages that you think you're going to get, but elaborate so that this way you're prepared in many different areas.
Yeah. So prepare outside the box and smile for that radio interview. And good luck. We would love to hear it if you send it to us after. So Susan asks, can you give us an idea how much you can make in the media? I guess she means financially.
Yeah. Let me say that for a range, it's from 0 to a lot. I really, as dietitians, we're not really supposed to be discussing fees, especially in this public forum. But I could tell you that if you're writing a story, it's really more working for brands that you'll get paid a lot. I think that what is sad about media is that, of course, I'm generalizing here, but a lot of the journalists that you work with and stories that you see, they work very hard. They could work tirelessly. You have no idea what it takes to put together a magazine month after month, and a lot of them don't get paid very much at all. So don't have these huge expectations of making a lot of money. And what I would focus on is more getting your name in the news and getting your messages out there, because it's not just getting your name in the news, actually. It's getting your name in the news because you have some really important messages to say.
Yeah, spreading the message. And also that can help grow any other area of your business. A lot of nutrition entrepreneurs aren't just working in the media or just doing private practice or just doing an online course, but they're doing all of those things. So getting your name in the media once, if somebody sees it, they might come to you in another way to find clients.
Right.
So,
And that's what really has built my foundation is, even though I do a lot of writing and I do love doing TV interviews and interviews on radio and things like that, I also do recipe development. I also do a lot of other things. I've even done kitchen design, which, all those things you study for the RD exam, and, the size ladles that you need for soup. Ugh, who wanted to even think about that stuff? And then someone hired me to design a kitchen for them. So like, you never know what comes up, crazy stuff. But it's important to not, again, pigeonhole yourself and really just have fun with it.
Yeah, it's great advice. Have fun. Can't go wrong. Okay, so Eileen asks, Bonnie, can I have my marketing assistants help me with reaching out to reporters? I'll write the pitches, but with my schedule, it would be easier if my assistant can search on Harrow.
Of course. Of course, any help you could get with anything, I highly recommend.
She said there's a second part. Some experts say it should all come from you, but my practice can get a little hectic, so if my staff could help, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that depends upon your personality. If you're good at delegating, then that would be great. I am not only not great about delegating, but I feel like I have to do most things myself. And I'm not recommending this, but I feel like it needs to be my voice, even with someone, posting for you on social media. I feel like it kind of needs to be me, because I feel like that genuine nature coming from my heart, using humor, as I said, like that's not the kind of thing someone that could necessarily do for you. If you find someone who can and has a voice like yours, then of course that's wonderful. But it is helpful if you can delegate. Trust me, it's very helpful if you could.
Definitely. So, let me see. Are there any other questions? Oh, somebody asked, how does payment work with the media? Do they already have a set price they can pay, or are you able to negotiate? So I guess that means, is it also coming from the editors or producers of the TV, or is it only when you're working with brands?
No, it could also come from editors and producers. And I feel like everything is negotiable, but there are some placements where you may say, and by the way, what is your budget for this story? And they'll say XYZ, and depending on the venue, you may say, that's just wonderful, thank you. And other times you may say, like, seriously? So it really just depends upon how big the platform is.
Yeah.
And
is there
you have to put in?
Yeah.
But these are just going back to my class, these are all the details, because I think that it's really important, again, going back to not being taken advantage of. There are ways to negotiate. And, this is something that I learned very, very early on, that it's really important to hear what they have to say before you offer up what you're interested in getting.
Yeah. So don't stick your foot in your mouth.
Exactly.
Okay, so what is the typical way, speaking of working with brands versus it coming from the media source, what is the typical way RDs get started with brands? I know some have ambassador programs. Would you recommend just reaching out to a brand you're interested in representing?
I always recommend reaching out to anybody you feel like talking to. I think that is really important. You mentioned some ways where you can, now on social media, it's much easier to connect with brands by mentioning them, either their hashtag that they like to use or their actual name. Don't have great expectations, but it's exciting to have expectations, especially if it's a brand that you'd enjoy working with. So yeah, that's a great way to reach out. Pick up the phone, you'll shock them. The phone is a forgotten art. I love talking on the phone. I love calling a reporter instead of sending an email. Sometimes they're really surprised to hear from you.
That's a great tip. So, okay, why don't you like Skype interviews?
All right, I'll tell you what happened with this Skype interview last one I did. So CNN called me and they asked me to test it out before we did the interview. So I had my glasses on. I had my computer in a place that I didn't want to have it for the interview. And she says, okay, let's do a test. So we just put it on. We did a test. And she said, okay, that's great. Thanks. I'm going to call you in about 10 minutes. Fine. So took my glasses off, fixed my hair, put my computer up, the whole thing. And when they actually showed the interview, they showed the first clip of me in my glasses looking down. It was terrible. And then after that, they had it online, and they used that picture. So I'm not crazy about the way that Skype comes across. I think that, although it is a lot like this, but it's not always as clear. So it is not my favorite venue.
Well said. Okay. I've recently been approached to host a national radio show via Voice America. Congratulations. Do you think it is realistically financially sound dive to take? They ask for a large sum upfront to cover costs of a 13-week pilot, then have the opportunity to obtain sponsors, advertisers. What's the best way to get advertisers?
Well, they're asking you to pay for being on the show. Is that what you're saying?
That's what the question reads to me. Emily, if you're here and want to elaborate a little bit more, that might be useful. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I once did a radio show, a regular radio show, and they said that I could get sponsors if I want to, and turns out I decided not to at that time, but it was a long time ago. So if you want sponsors, you just have to make it clear about the arrangement that you have with these sponsors. Let's say your sponsor was X brand of sneakers. Just make sure that when you're doing this kind of show, you're not saying, oh, and for breakfast, I think you should eat this, and then take a run with X brand sneakers. And then for dinner, you could do this. And then, oh, in the morning when you wake up, put on X brand sneakers. I just think that you really need to be careful about what you're actually selling, and whether it's going to be a subtle sell or if it's something where you're really going to have to go out there and advertise. So, get all the details. I've never paid for media placements, but there are some that may be worth it for you.
Yeah, it's very individual situation. So it's also depends what else is going on in your life, it sounds like. So Shayna asked, what have you enjoyed most about working with the media? That's a great question.
Oh, you could ask my husband this question and he'll tell you that he hates it. The reason why is because what I love, it's really so much. I mean, I have had a private practice for many, many, many years. I have an office out on Long Island and I have an office in Manhattan. Really many, many years. And I love the patients that I see. At this point, my clients have become, it's sort of like a boutique practice where I feel like inviting them for dinner. We talk about so many things that are not even nutrition related most of the time. But when you're doing an interview, if I write a story for today's show, let's say, and then they put it up on their Facebook page and there are 2,500 comments, it is really a charge to know that when you're speaking, that you're speaking to thousands of people at once. It is very frustrating. And I could tell you that sometimes I have a real love-hate relationship, like on the way to the city, in a car, practicing my sound bites. I'm saying to myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, you have to be crazy to do this kind of thing. And then after the interview's over, I'm like, it's like electricity. It's so exciting. So I don't know if there's any one thing that I like most, but after all these years, I still love it. And I love talking about it.
Well, that's perfect with your new course. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your course, and we'll wrap up the evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Well, okay, so this class is something that I am now only offering to the people who are taking this webinar. So if you respond by June 15th, I'm only opening it up to the first 15 people that respond. And it is a 2-hour webinar training session where literally I will go into depth about just everything you need to know about doing a media interview. from developing sound bites to what to where to look, to how to pivot off of a question. What if you get a challenging question? I will talk about all of those things. And the other thing is that I am also doing a special offer again for the people who are here tonight to have a private one-to-one session with me where you could then ask me any questions that you have. If you have a radio show coming up, if you'd like to do TV, if you want to write but you're having a hard time with writing, anything you want to run by me, we could do together in this private phone call that is totally confidential. No one else will know you ever called me or what we talked about. So if you just want to call to say hi, then that's good too. But anyway, I hope that you'll sign up for my class. Chelsea is putting the link in the chat box there. And if you have any other questions, please feel free. I hope that you'll sign up for my newsletter, and please, just say hi. Follow me on Instagram. I'm at Bonnie Taub-Dix, or Twitter at Eat Smart. But the best way to learn about what to do in media is to follow those people that you either would like to emulate or those people that you would want nothing to do with, and you learn about what you will just not be doing.
Somebody's asking about the cost of the class.
Yes, if you go onto that link, you'll see all the information there, but I think you'll find it to be pretty reasonable for what you'll get for it.
Yes, I agree. And I've personally worked with Bonnie for years now. And I have to say, I've learned so much. She really is such an expert in this field and so eloquent in all of her media interviews. So you definitely will learn a lot. I want to say thank you so much to Bonnie for being here tonight and for taking your time to share all of your expertise and stories with us. If you have any additional questions for Bonnie, you can let us know. You can always email us, marketing@gethealthy.com, or if you have any questions for me, you can email chelsea@gethealthy.com, and we will be sure to send out the recording tomorrow. So have a wonderful evening, and thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you so much for being such a wonderful hostess.